My name is Benjamin Stevens, and I've been building and hunting with bows like this one since I was 10 years old. In this video, I want to walk you through every step in the process so that you can build one too. The first thing I want to talk about is wood selection. Here's a list of different woods that I've used for building bows. There are more than are on this list that will work great, but these are just the ones that I have experience with and would recommend to you. When a bow is being drawn back, it's under two different forces. The back of the bow, the side that faces away from the archer, is being stretched. It's under tension. And the belly that faces the archer is under compression. Some woods are way better at one than the other, and depending on the strengths of the wood, we have to alter our design slightly. When it comes to actually building the bow, the gold standard, in my opinion, is hickory. It's by far the most forgiving wood to work with, and it also holds world records in flight archery, making it one of the highest performing woods. It does have two downsides, however, which is that it's very rot prone, so if you don't treat the tree really fast and get it out of the moisture and take the bark off right away, you can actually have the wood ruined by spalting and rot from something as simple as leaving the bark on too long during the drying process. Its other biggest con is that it absorbs moisture out of the air, so if you're hunting in a very humid environment, the bow will actually be very sluggish and shoot a lot slower than if you were to shoot it in a nice cool and dry environment like wintertime in Alaska. My second favorite bow wood might surprise you, and that's birch. I think this is a super underrated wood for making bows. It's very tension strong, just like hickory, even easier to work with. And because it's so tension strong, you can get away with really tight recurves or even really aggressive designs that you wouldn't want to do with other woods. One thing that I will note is that it's also very rot prone, just like hickory, so it's a better cold weather and dry weather wood for hunting. And it also really likes a heat treat, so you'll notice that this belly of my bow is turned golden brown with fire hardening, which I'll show you much later in this video. I'm going to lump a bunch of woods together right here. This one happens to be ash, but all of these woods I find to be pretty similar. They're tension strong, very dense white woods, but you can make great bows out of these, and if they grow on your property, then any of these would be a great choice. Osage orange is a very popular bow making wood. In my opinion, it's a little bit overrated. It makes a good bow, it's very rot resistant, but there's a lot of extra work that's necessary when you're making an Osage bow, like chasing a growth ring and removing all of the sapwood. And I don't see any performance benefits out of my Osage bows. They don't outperform any whitewood bow like my hickories or even birches. Personally, I would rather just work with one of these other more common woods. There are a few conifers or evergreen trees that make good bows. Two of my favorites are yew. Pacific yew is the only one I have experience with, and eastern red cedar or juniper. This happens to be a juniper tree. This is one of the prettiest bows I've ever made, and also for its draw weight, the fastest bow I've ever made. One of the cool things about these conifer trees is that they have two tones of wood and you can use both in the bow. The white sapwood or cream colored sapwood is tension strong, and the purpley red heartwood is compression strong, so you can get a nice two-tone bow. They look awesome. They hold moisture so well that makes them really rot resistant, and you can use them in high humidity environments. However, if you shoot them below freezing, they're prone to explosions. The moisture inside the limb is trapped, and if it freezes and then you draw the bow back, I've had several friends report that they've had bows explode on them in below freezing conditions from yew particularly. Another very underrated wood is black walnut. I don't see a lot of people using this wood, but I think it's a great wood to make a bow out of. It's another two-tone wood. You can get some of that really rich heartwood in your bow. The sapwood is very tension strong, and in my experience very similar to birch. Rot resistance is also a problem with this wood, but if you treat it well, it makes a great hunting bow and a very pretty one too. If you plan on hunting in a high humidity environment, or you want a tree that you can find almost anywhere in the northern hemisphere, oak is a great choice. Every species of oak will make a great bow. This happens to be a red oak, which is not quite as durable as white oak, but still makes a great bow and is very common. White oak, which is named after the color of the bark, not the actual wood, is probably my favorite, and the grain is so tight and so water resistant that it makes great barrels for wine. If you're looking for the best all-around wood, white oak is probably my top choice. Those are just a few of my favorite woods, but there are so many more. But just to conserve time, we're gonna cut it here and know that any wood on this list will work for the design that I'm going to teach you. Now we are going to go out in the woods and actually select a tree to make a bow out of. There's a free app called Picture This that I use sometimes, especially in the wintertime when it's hard to identify trees. It's just a free app that's available in the app store on your phone. You take a picture of the tree and it'll tell you what species it is. Works pretty good. It's not perfect. But mostly what I'm looking for is a nice straight trunk with not very many branches or knots. Be prepared to look at hundreds or even thousands of trees before you actually cut one down to make a bow. The more picky you are with your tree selection, the easier the rest of the process will be. Well, we might have just found the best tree that has ever been a tree before. Look at this thing. Not a single branch for the bottom, I don't know, 15, 20 feet. Totally smooth. The only thing is that down here, it does a little wave. But I think if we took like from here to there, that's at least 12 feet of tree, which would be 2 bows in length, and it's a big enough tree that you'll probably get 4 quarters out of it. So 8 bows right there in one tree. I think that's the one we need to cut down. This is not a tree felling course, so I won't go into chainsaw work. On smaller trees, I like to use a handsaw. But I dropped the tree, cut it into 6-foot sections, 72 inches long, and then carried it back to the truck. Hardwoods are super heavy, so make sure you don't park too far away from where you cut the tree down. I just want to mention here that you can totally use a small diameter tree, especially if it's one of the tension strong woods like birch, maple, hickory, and all of those just regular whitewood trees. Something about this big in diameter is totally fine, and you can skip this whole splitting section, but I'm still going to show you how I deal with big trees, because for the most part I'm using big trees so that I can get many bows out of one tree. This log is about 8 inches in diameter, so I think I'm going to be able to get at least 4 bow staves out of this log. I need to split it and then split each half again to make quarters of the log. Uh-oh, we've got a small problem. It didn't follow my split. I'm just going to finish it out the best I can. So what happened here is the split that it chose went off to one side. I don't think that's indicative of the grain pattern at all. It's not twisting or anything. It just sheared off towards the edge of the log. But the grain is fairly straight. You can see the heartwood is a little bit wavy. What I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to put this up on blocks and use my chainsaw to cut staves out of this log. And we're just going to have to manually choose with a saw what our staves are going to look like as opposed to splitting it. When I'm cutting logs lengthwise to make boards or bow staves, I like to use a longer barred chainsaw. The reason I like a long bar is because it's a long straight edge. I make sure that my cut is vertical, stacked up on pieces of firewood so I don't hit the dirt underneath the log. And I swing my chainsaw vertically as I walk up and down the log. I'm only using the 3 teeth on the end of the bar to cut at a time. And I find that that keeps my chain sharper for longer and actually cuts more efficiently than laying the entire length of the bar down and trying to use more teeth at one time. So we ended up with 4 6-foot long staves, and then that piece that kind of split off of the backside, I cut into short staves or billets. There's 2 of these, and they will later be joined together at the handle. In total, we'll be able to make 5 bows out of this one 6-foot long log that was 8 inches in diameter. Now what's left to do is seal the end grain with some sort of waterproof barrier. My favorite thing to use is Elmer's classroom glue, and then set it somewhere warm and dry to season. It takes about 8 to 12 months for something to go from a green log to a seasoned stave. The best way to know if your stave is completely dry is to weigh it and then weigh it again a week later, and if it hasn't lost any weight, then it's dry. This is a different stave than the birch tree that I just cut down, and it's been seasoning for about 5 months. I want to build a bow out of it soon, so I'm going to try and make it dry as quickly as possible, which means I'm going to remove the bark so that more moisture can come out from the back of the bow as well. Bark has two layers. There's the textured outer bark, and then there's the underbark, also known as cambium, and I'm going to show you the difference. I'm going to remove the outer bark but leave the cambium on. And then you see that color change? So this is the outer bark, and that's the cambium. It's usually a light brown color. Some woods it's actually pretty close to the wood color, so you have to be careful. But the reason that I'm leaving that on is because we need to be incredibly careful not to damage the outer growth ring of this tree, because we're going to be putting a ton of pressure on that when we bend this bow. So if I just get it down to the cambium, that'll allow more moisture to come through, but I'm not going to take the time to remove the cambium right now because it's not necessary and I don't want to damage anything. Now the bark is removed off this piece and I've got just cambium on the back. A very simple design that I like when I'm making my bows is to take my draw length, which is 28 inches, times that by 2, plus the unbending sections of the limb. So I'm going to cut this in length, and then I'll show you what the rest of the design looks like. So the next thing I need to do is mark the center line down the length of the bow. For this I use a chalk line. And then I'm going to mark the center 32 inches, and then 2 inches on either side of that, so 30 and 34, that'll be my handle section. And then 2 inches from there, so 28 and 36, and that'll be where it fades from a thin handle to a wide limb. Those are called the fades. Now I've got a nice flexible ruler, and my handle, those 4 inches in the center of the bow, I like to have 1 inch wide. So mark a 1/2 inch on either side of that line, and then connect those lines with my ruler. That's just a nice starting point for a good, comfortable handle. At the end of the fades, so 2 inches on either side of the handle, I marked where my fades will be. The limbs are going to be 1.75 inches wide, but for now, I'm just going to mark 2 inches and we can always narrow it later. So 1 inch on either side of center, and then I'll continue marking every 8 inches or so down the limb all the way to the end. And then here's where my fades go from the 1 inch wide handle to the 2 inch wide limbs. Now I've got 2 inch wide limbs all the way to the end of the stave, but I need to narrow them. So 10 inches from the end, I'm going to mark. And then the tips, I'm going to start with 1/2 inch wide. So mark 1/4 inch on either side, and then connect those little hash marks with my lines at 10 inches. Now I can see the bow in the wood, which is a pretty cool part of the process. So I need to remove all of the wood that's outside of these lines, making sure that I stay 90 degrees with the bark side of the bow. In order to do that, I need the stave to be completely stationary. So I can either hold it by clamping it to a picnic table with spring clamps. I can put it in a bench vise if I have a nice workbench. Or I can use what's called a shave horse. This shave horse, or bowyer's bench, come here buddy, come over here. This is just a really simple device. It's got a pivoting arm that clamps my wood. It's got a table, and mine is adjustable, so it can go up and down to clamp bigger, smaller pieces of wood. And it's built on sawhorses. Mine happens to be collapsible. These arms pivot in, so the legs can fold up and I can hang it on the wall easily. And then I just put a nice piece of wood on top and a little cushion that I got from the hardware store. So I'm just going to push with my foot pedal and clamp my piece of wood, and then take my draw knife and remove the wood that's outside of my pencil lines. Now notice that this piece is splitting and wanting to dive in to my pencil lines. To prevent that, I'm actually going to need to cut from the other direction. Sometimes chipping happens like that if you're cutting against the grain. So if you go from the other side, then you can stop it from going too deep and ruining your piece of wood. The handle section can be a little bit tricky because it narrows from two ends and you don't want to accidentally take off too much and go into your limb. So what I do is I cut from one side, being really careful to stop at the middle of the handle and make a bunch of feathers, it looks like. And then I go from the other side and then take all those feathers off. And I continue doing that until I make a nice, smooth, kind of a bowl-shaped handle. Now from the front, it looks just like a bow, but obviously the limbs are way too thick to be bending, so I need to narrow them. I'm going to take a pencil and mark about 1/2 inch thick. This is just to get me close to bending thickness. It'll end up being about 3/8 of an inch thick when it actually starts bending. I could remove all of this wood with the same draw knife that I was using to bring it down to shape, but it would take a long time. So this is just a time-saving trick that I've learned, and I'm going to use any kind of handsaw, and I'm going to cut every 6 inches, and then I'm going to take a chisel and hammer and knock out big blocks. But when I'm cutting, I'm being very careful not to go below that 1/2 inch line. The main thing to be careful of when you're using a chisel and hammer is that if the crack wants to dive down, you might have to come through with your handsaw and cut off another piece. But if you're careful and only take a little bit off at a time, this saves a ton of draw knifing and is the fastest way to get your bow down to thickness. Now I'm just going to take my draw knife and clean this up a little bit. So now we've got it thinned down to about 1/2 inch. We've got our front profile pretty mapped out. I need to do these tapers. I'm just going to use the same chisel and taper from the thickness of the handle down to the thinness of the limb. And then I'm going to take this rasp. This is just a $20 farrier's rasp, which is what they use to shape horse feet, and just really clean this piece of wood up before I actually get this down to bending thickness.
Now I need to get the wood the rest of the way down to that line. But I'm actually rasping at an angle so you can see that my tool marks only go about halfway across the limb. And then I'll turn the bow around and hit it from this side. And then we'll end up with a ridge in the center, which we'll take off later. It's just a lot easier to remove material off of corners than it is to actually remove the entire flat top. And also with this rasp, if I went flat, I'd be at risk of tear out on the far side. So we remove down to the line on this side, turn the rasp around, remove down to the line on this side, and then remove the ridge off of the center. Now I need to be super precise and get these limbs down to 3/8 of an inch. So I've got my tape measure and a pencil, and I'm just going to mark 3/8 of an inch, and I'm going to continue with my rasp, bringing it down to this line but now I'm going to start using the fine side of the rasp because I really don't want to go below that 3/8 of an inch line, and the closer we get, the slower we want to go. Now this is what's called a bow blank, a bow-shaped object that's not quite bending yet. I've actually got it bending a little bit if I push on the floor. That's called floor tillering. And the only reason I do this is to check to make sure that the limbs are roughly even. If I notice that one limb is bending a lot easier than the other, then I'll just do a little bit of work to get them roughly the same. But the next thing we need to address is limb twist. Lots of trees have a little bit of twisting in their grain, and so when you split your bow out of the tree, or split your stave out of the tree, you end up with a little bit of propeller twist. It's really easy to fix with just a little bit of heat. You can do it with steam or a fire, or in this case we're going to use a heat gun. I'm just going to heat up the limb until it's too hot to comfortably touch for more than about a second, and then I'm going to put weight on the end of a spring clamp and then pull it just a little bit farther than straight. As it cools down, it'll settle into that new position, and then I'll take everything off and it should be about straight. You can do this as many times as you need to. Just be careful not to get the back of the bow or the side that faces away from the archer too hot, because you don't want that side brittle. Just heat the belly. I intend to give you guys all of the secrets to bow building, and I want you to be able to watch one of my videos and go out into the woods and do it yourself. But if you still want to be walked through the process, I do teach workshops. Right now I have available dates in June in Michigan, and then in August here in Alaska. So if you want to sign up for one of those workshops, head to the link down in the description, and I'll see you there. Now while the bow's cooling down, I'm going to make a string. I've got 2 nails that are about 100 inches apart. I'm going to make 8 strands of B55 around those nails. This is B55, I just get it on Amazon, and it's just a type of waxed Dacron string that I use to make bowstrings out of. Now that I've got 2 bundles of 8 strands of B55, I'm going to match them up 10 inches from the end. I'm going to put them together in my fingers like this. And now I'm taking my right hand, I'm holding the strings in my left, I'm taking my right hand and pinching one of the bundles between my pointer finger and my thumb, and I'm rolling it away from my body. Then when I come back, I grab the string between my pointer finger and my middle finger and pull the bundle back over the top. And now I've got the second color on top. And just repeat that process. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm twisting the fibers one way and then the bundles the other, and it locks them into place. This is called a Flemish twist. I'm going to continue that until I have about 2 inches twisted together. Now I've got 2 inches twisted together and some tag ends. I'm going to put these tag ends back with the other strands of the same color to create a loop. And I'm just going to continue my twist to tie the loop into the main string. And we'll do that for about 3 inches, then we can trim the tag ends off. Just like that. I like to line my bow up with the string and start my Flemish twist again maybe 6 inches from the end. It only really needs to be twisted where the knock points go. Now I'm just going to continue this Flemish twist all the way to the end of the string. For the other side of the string, I'm going to tie what's called a bowyer's knot, which is just a really easy adjustable knot. So all I do is I start with a bite, and then I do a regular overhand knot. See that? And then I'm going to take this tag end and wrap it through the loop 3 or 4 times. And then when I put that on the nock of the bow, the pressure here is going to keep that knot from coming untied. And then as I progress through the tillering process, I'll move this knot further up the string to make the bow string shorter. This is called a serving tool, and when you buy string serving material off of Amazon or any bow making website, it comes with this tool. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to set the tag end up the string. I'm just going to start wrapping, and I wrap directly over that tag end
Now that I'm past the arrow rest, I'm just going to create a bunch of slack. And I'm going to pass this through the loop that I create with the slack, twisting it the same way, but wrapping back towards the serving. I'll do this about 10 times. Now I'm going to put the slack end over here, and then as I unwrap these, I'll be wrapping over the tag end here. Now I can just pull this tight and then trim that, and then underneath here is our tag end. So there's a tag end here and a tag end here, so that should never come untied.
In order to string this bow, I need some simple string grooves. So I'm just going to take the corner of my rasp and file at a 45-degree angle, about ½ inch from the end. These will be replaced later, so they don't need to look perfect. They just need to be deep enough to hold a string. Now remember that in the beginning when we were making this bow, we took the bark off, but we left the cambium on. Cambium is not nearly as stretchy as wood, so we're going to have to thin it down. Sometimes I leave a little bit on as kind of a camouflage pattern because it contrasts with the wood a little bit. But it's important to get it thin enough that it doesn't crack as you stretch. I don't think it causes any functional problems to leave it on there, but it's really scary when you draw your bow back for the first time and you hear cracking and popping. But typically when you hear that sound, it's not the wood cracking and popping, it's just the cambium on top. I've done it a bunch of times and it's always terrifying. There's little bumps and grooves in the wood, and so sometimes I have to use a card scraper with little round edges on it to get the cambium out of these little grooves. You can also use sandpaper because the cambium's softer than the wood, so it'll sand off pretty easy. Now this bow is ready to start bending. So what I've got behind me is a tillering jig or a tillering tree. It's just a leather wrap, so there's 2 nails here, and then I cut slits on both ends of the leather, and I'm going to place the handle in there. And it's strapped to my railing. You could strap it to a tree, or you could actually build this whole thing on a wall, which is something that I do sometimes. Now I've got nails starting at 10 inches, and then every 2 inches down all the way to 28, which is my draw length, I've got these nails so that I can pull the string and latch on those nails. That works pretty good, but if you've got a little bit of extra time and tools laying around, if I put a pulley at the bottom of the tree and then hook that to my string, I can actually stand back and pull with a rope and watch it bending actively as opposed to just bending it on the nail and standing back. That's also advantageous because I can put a little luggage scale on the rope so I can see how many pounds I'm pulling with and also watch it bend at the same time. So it's just a piece of leather holding my handle, and then you can see these nails. But what I like better is to clip a rope there and then have a pulley at the bottom so that I can pull on this rope and bend my bow just like that. For this bow, I'm going to go all the way down to 28 inches, which is my personal draw length, and since I want this to be a hunting bow, I'm going to shoot for about 50 to 55 pounds. The advantage of using this luggage scale is that I can pull with exactly 55 pounds and see how far it's bending. It's important not to bend the bow with more weight than your finished draw weight, because you're just introducing more stress into the wood than is necessary, and you'll end up with string follow, which is where the bow stays a little bit bent even when the string is off of the bow. So I'm going to stand back and I'm going to pull on this with 55 pounds of force and look to see where it's bending. Any spots that are stiff, I'll scribble on with my pencil, and then I'll take wood off from the stiff spots until they're bending as smoothly as the spots that are already bending.
My primary tool for removing wood at this stage is a card scraper. I just push with the edge and it creates nice little ribbons. If I'm being really aggressive, sometimes I use the back of my draw knife, a nice flat blade, and I do the same thing. The advantage to this is if you're really hogging off a lot of material, it doesn't get hot. When you use a card scraper, you're creating so much friction, it's such a thin piece of metal, that you can actually burn yourself if you're not careful. I'm going to keep doing this, checking, removing, until I've got this bow bending, till it looks about like a strung bow. And then I'm actually going to shorten this string so that it's 2 inches shorter than the bow length itself, and string it up and continue that process until I get it back to my draw length. This is the longest part of bow making, and this is also the most important part to get right. If your bow is going to break, it's probably going to break during this part of the process. And it's either going to be because you didn't take enough time looking at the wood and really assessing what's going on, or you removed wood from one spot too quickly, or if you didn't take care of your wood in the beginning and there's some sort of spalting or rot on the back of this bow, that can be a common failure point as well. So if you do break a bow, make sure you look it over and really try and figure out what happened. Was it a hinge that you made by removing too much material at one time? Was it that there was some sort of spalting or soft spot on the back of the bow? Was there beetle damage on the back of the bow? There's always a reason. Bows don't just break just because. So it's important that we learn from each time that a bow breaks so that it doesn't happen to us again in the same way. Right now this bow is drawing about 65 pounds at 28 inches, which is a little bit higher than I wanted, but when I shape the handle, I'm actually going to make a deeper thumb groove. So 28 inches is actually going to be about 3/4 of an inch less, so that will reduce the draw weight a little bit. As I shoot it in, it will develop a small amount of string follow, which is normal, and that will reduce draw weight a little bit. I'm going to add tip overlays with antler pieces. That's going to actually increase the draw weight because then we're pushing the string further forward. So there's a lot of things that are going to change the draw weight slightly. So I would rather finish the bow and then see how I like to shoot it and adjust the draw weight later than drop it all the way down to my target range now. But what's most important is that it's bending very smoothly. But now this is a bow. I can shoot it, I could take it hunting, and it would be completely functional. And everything from this point forward is considered finish work. Things that make the bow prettier or more comfortable in your hand, but don't necessarily increase the performance of the bow itself. But before I leave the tillering tree, I just want to tell you a couple things. If you accidentally miss your draw weight and end up too low of a draw weight, there are 3 things that you can do. You can heat treat the belly by getting it really hot, just like we did during the twisting portion. You can add back set or recurve to it by clamping it to some sort of form, and then as you heat it, it'll take back set. And you can also shorten the bow by about 1 inch from either end. Shortening the bow will increase your draw weight, but it doesn't necessarily increase performance that much, because as you near 90 degrees with the angle between your string and your limbs, you lose a lot of performance with your bow. So that's why I like to keep them pretty long, 66 inches. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to shape this handle and add antler pieces to the tips. When I'm shaping the handles, my primary tool is a half-round rasp. There's 2 different types of handles on traditional bows. There's the more modern pistol grip, which has a deep thumb groove and an arrow rest, and those things help you hold the bow more consistently and generally make you a little bit more consistent and more accurate. And then there's the very traditional, just smooth, straight handles with no arrow rest. As far as I know, there are no ancient cultures that used arrow rests. An arrow rest is a 20th century invention that came out around the same time as they made compound bows. It's more comfortable for the archer because then you don't have the fletchings sliding across your knuckle, and it's more consistent because your hand can move but an arrow rest cannot. For this bow, I'm gonna shape a pistol grip handle, and I'm also gonna put an antler arrow rest. If you decide to go with a less traditional pistol grip handle, I do have a couple of tips to make your bow a little bit more accurate. I dish out where the arrow pass is gonna be, and then I put antler tip above my knuckle. And the reason that I like to use antlers instead of a flat shelf is because they're round. So if you think about a round cylinder and a round cylinder sliding past each other perpendicularly, they're only touching at a very, very small point. So even if you do make an arrow rest, you should probably round it over too, instead of making a flat arrow rest. I found that the thumb groove being deeper is more important than the pointer finger being deeper, which is kind of a little bit counterintuitive. But if your thumb points straight at your target, you have an easier time not torquing the bow side to side when you're shooting than if your pointer finger was to go deeper and kind of wrap this way. And then I'm going to sand this all the way from 80 grit to 400 grit and make it as smooth as possible. The reason I add antlers is twofold. I like how it looks, and it also protects the ends of the limbs from the string, so you can use a more abrasive and lower stretch bowstring material. When I'm shaping my tip overlays, I usually do a deep groove in the back with a chainsaw file, and then I angle 45 degrees towards the string, because when the bow is strung, it doesn't actually sit flat, it sits like this. But it's also important to take a flat file and narrow this section, because as you draw the bow back, it's going to rotate up, so there needs to be nothing for the string to hang up on right there. For the arrow rest, I'm just going to drill a hole and then pound a little antler tine in there. This happens to be a caribou antler tine, but any deer species will work. I just think that this is a really nice low friction arrow rest that protects my knuckle from the fletchings. Now we have a question of brace height, which is how far should the string be away from the riser. You can shorten the string either by twisting it counterclockwise or by shortening this knot. I prefer to adjust the string by shortening the knot because it's more permanent. If you do the twisting method and then you take the string off, it'll untwist. So I want my brace height to be so that my fletchings don't touch the arrow rest. And I don't want to go any higher than that, because then we start to lose performance out of the bow. So I'm just going to unstring it and then adjust this knot, and a little bit of adjustment goes a long way. Let's see how that is. There. Let's shoot this thing. Nice. That thing shoots great. I think 60 pounds, right around 55, 60 pounds is a perfect hunting weight. I would not hesitate at all to go moose hunting with this bow. And I've got pass-throughs on whitetail with 40, but just having that little extra oomph if you hit a rib or something is really nice. Now let's stain it. This is vinegar with a ball of steel wool on the inside of it. And it's been sitting on a shelf for a long time, so the steel wool is kind of dissolving in there. And this creates a chemical reaction with the tannins in the wood and oxidizes it. But it usually makes the wood a lot darker, and it's better than staining the wood because it goes deeper and it's a more permanent stain. I love how it really makes the growth rings pop in a way that you couldn't really see those before I did the ebonizing treatment. And the cambium that we left on as a camo pattern turns almost purple, which I just think looks crazy cool. I'm going to give this a couple hours to continue reacting, and then I'm going to put a coating on the back of the bow. So there's two types of protective coatings that you can put on your bow. You can either do an oil treatment, which repels water, or you can do a clear coat, which creates a water barrier and locks it out. The biggest enemy to your bow is moisture. The reason that I prefer oil is because it allows the wood to breathe. Every time you take it into a new environment or a new temperature, the wood's going to expand and contract. And then also, as you're drawing the bow back, there's a lot of movement, especially on the back of the bow. And so if you did a clear coat and you didn't use something that's able to really flex and move, it'll crack over time. And also the clear coats can yellow over time too. Spar urethane is the best that I found, but I still think oil is better. The only downside to doing an oil finish is that it has to be reapplied. I would say if you're hunting hard, especially in the rain, I would reapply every year at the beginning of hunting season. So here's the finished product. If you guys have any questions, drop them down in the comments below. If you want to see more complex builds or learn how to make recurves or what it's like working with different types of materials, check out my other videos. And if you still want to be walked through the process in person, I have class dates available that you can check out on my website, stevenswild.com, link in the description. And I'll also be selling this bow as well as several others. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.